Harry Truman was our 33rd President of the United States from 1945 to 1953. He was from Missouri, the Show Me State, and he was a senator from Missouri previously to becoming the Vice President. Truman would also be our first and only president to drop nuclear weapons. Truman was born in Lamar, Missouri on May 8th, 1884. His father was a farmer and a livestock dealer. The family moved around Missouri a bit and then decided to settle in Independence, Missouri when the young Truman was only 6. Independence is just outside of Kansas City. Truman's father knew a lot of people in politics, and Truman even got to be a page at the 1900 Democratic National Convention in Kansas City. He tried to attend a business college in Kansas City, but he would have to go back to the farm and help his father, so he would end up dropping out. He never finished his education and instead worked for a short time in a mailroom at the Kansas City Star. Then he was a timekeeper on a construction crew for the Topeka and Santa Fe railways. Both Truman and his brother also worked as clerks for a bank in Kansas City. When the banking job didn't work out, he returned to the farm, which they called the Grandview Farm. He then decided that he wanted to go to West Point and have a military career, but he was denied due to his poor eyesight. So Truman came up with a plan. What would you do? He decided he would just memorize the eye chart. And then he joined the Missouri National Guard in 1917. Truman rose to the rank of captain and served with the field artillery unit. At his unit, there were discipline problems. One time, his men tried to flee the battlefield. Truman started yelling and cussing and swearing at them, and they never heard him talk like that, and they returned to the battlefield. After World War I, he joined the Officer Reserve Corps. He volunteered for World War II, but he was a bit old. FDR also wanted all members of Congress, members of the Senate, to stay in place, even if they were reserve soldiers. When he finally retired in 1953, he had risen to the rank of colonel. And after the war, he was finally able to get Bess Wallace, his old girlfriend, to marry him on June 28th, 1919. Previously, when he asked her to marry him, she said no. They opened a clothing store together along with a friend. It went bankrupt due to the recession in 1921. It took him over a decade to repay the debts he owed. He then managed to get himself elected as a county court judge in 1922, but lost his election bid in 1924. A county court judge isn't really a judge, it's more like a county commissioner. In 1926, however, he was able to win another position as a presiding judge and was reelected in 1930. And in 1934, he won a seat to the U.S. Senate. Truman fought against the influence of special interests and the profiteering and waste in the buildup of our armed forces spending. The committee that he headed saved hundreds of billions of dollars in today's money. When FDR decided to run for a fourth term, many in the party knew that he would probably not make the whole term. He would die before his term was over. And they felt that FDR's vice president was too liberal. So they ended up picking Truman as a compromise candidate to run as vice president. Truman was a little hesitant because he was worried that he had his wife and his sister on his Senate payroll, and he thought that might come up and cause a big problem with the election. They easily won, however, receiving 432 votes to Dewey's 99. As vice president, Truman really didn't do much. He cast one tie-breaking vote in the Senate, and he actually only met FDR twice. Truman was rarely informed about policy issues. However, he was only vice president for 90 days before FDR died. When Truman took over the presidency, he kept most of FDR's staff, but it wasn't long before almost all of them were replaced. Truman was a hard-working president and studied matters in depth, and he took whatever time it took to understand them. After becoming president, Truman was finally informed about our nuclear bomb program. It's kind of interesting because Stalin knew about it way before this through espionage activities. He would then have a decision about whether to use it or not. When Truman heard about the estimates that maybe 500,000 people might die if we had to invade the Japanese island, maybe 1 million, maybe more, it was a no-brainer. He decided to drop the bomb. After the war, Truman would face a host of issues. The troops coming home, it was feared, would cause virtually an economic collapse. There weren't enough jobs for them, and there weren't enough housing for them. There were railway strikes all across the nation. Truman's approval ratings went from over 80% to just over 50%. A short time later, they were down to 32%, and he got destroyed in the midterm elections. Truman also advocated for civil rights, which killed him down south. He was actually the first president to address the NAACP. He later restructured the armed services. He was trying to save money. He would incorporate them into what is today called the Department of Defense. He also created the Air Force, the National Security Council, and the CIA. Truman's popularity took another blow when everyone accused him of losing China when Mao Zedong took over the nation. Truman's popularity rose during the Berlin airlift when Stalin tried to block Berlin from receiving any supplies. A massive use of planes and material unmatched in history to get supplies to the western part of Berlin. But as popularity goes up, it goes down again, because Truman was a strong supporter of the State of Israel over the objections of virtually his entire staff. When the elections of 1948 came, it was believed he would lose. In fact, it was known he would lose. In 1948, he also ended discrimination in the armed forces and the civil service. I mean, at least legal discrimination. In his re-election bid, he crisscrossed the entire nation. He also had to deal with Strom Thurmond, a senator from the South who was going to run as president as an independent and split the Democratic vote. All the pollsters got it wrong. He would receive 303 electoral votes to Dewey's 189 and Thurmond's 39. The Chicago Tribune even had a front page headline, "Dewey defeats Truman." Truman, after being elected, would face a host of issues. First, the Soviet Union exploded their all-nuclear bomb, which pretty much made Americans pissed off. Then it was the Korean War, which we did not seem to be winning. He also faced the problem of Mao trying to take over Taiwan. And then, in one of his most unpopular moves, he fired General MacArthur. His approval rating went down to 22%. Not only that, he had Senator Joseph McCarthy from Wisconsin saying that there were commies all over the place. There was a commie under every rug, every stone. Every State Department person was a commie. To top that off, he faced a corruption scandal. Not himself, not personally, but his staff members and members of the IRS were taking bribes. Truman thought about running for another term, but he was talked out of it. Truman returned to Kansas City, to the Wallace home. When Lyndon Johnson was able to get Medicare passed, Truman and his wife received the first 2 Medicare cards. There's always talk about how Truman was one of our poorest presidents. He was, but after he became president, he ended up dying with something like $10 million in today's money. Much of it was from his memoirs. He died on December 26, 1972, at the age of 88. Bess Truman, his wife, died 10 years later in 1982. If you like these presidential videos, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for listening.